Hello, everybody. Welcome to Activity Schedules, More Than Just Leisure Skills. My name is Ray Cepeda. I am the director and founder of ABA Skills. We are a behavioral consultation group that provides behavioral consultation to families, schools, school districts, all over, everywhere. So I am super excited for this workshop tonight because this particular topic is actually not something that I am really good at. So I'm looking forward to learning everything that I possibly can. And your presenter tonight is brilliant, amazing, super smart, creative, and I think you're going to get a tremendous amount. So this brings me to our presenter tonight, and that is Marissa Ferguson, who is a board certified behavior analyst with a master's in science and applied behavior analysis from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. She also has a bachelor's degree in child advocacy and policy from Montclair State University. So Marissa completed her clinical supervision at the Alpine Learning Group in New Jersey, and her experience includes working with adults with special needs on vocational programming, working with young learners with autism through early intervention, and working with adolescents with special needs in both school and home program settings as a program supervisor, coordinator, and consultant. And I am particularly proud that Marissa does some work for ABA Skills because she just makes us look good. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the spotlight over to Marissa Ferguson.
Thanks, Ray.
You're very welcome.
Thank you again so much for coming to, excuse me. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I'm really looking forward to sharing this presentation with you. Activity schedules are something that I'm particularly passionate about. I like to include activity schedules in my home programming, school programming, whenever possible. Something that I really enjoy about activity schedules is the way that we can use them to facilitate independence for our learners. So I'm going to go ahead and get into our presentation. So first of all, what is an activity schedule? An activity schedule is a visual representation of a sequence of events for a given time, and you can use that in a binder. You can use that on a list form. You could use a smartphone or a tablet. You can depict the events in your schedule using pictures or clip art. You could use text for a learner who can read. You could even use audio. You can use activity schedules in a variety of places. You can use them at home, you can use them at school, you can use them in extracurricular settings, and you can use them in work settings. So what are the benefits of using, I'm sorry, excuse me, I need to minimize the window here so that I can see my screen. Thank you. All right, so what are the benefits of using activity schedules? We use activity schedules to increase independence in homes, in classrooms, and in work settings. We use activity schedules in order to potentially decrease interfering behaviors. We can use them in order to promote language and facilitate opportunities to teach language incidentally. We might use activity schedules in order to ease transitions between activities or environments. And we also look at a way to create structure for learners and staff and families through a schedule. We can offer an organized setting for choice making through our schedules. And we can also consider, when we're working with multiple learners, how an activity schedule might be an effective management tool for multiple learners in a school setting, in a clinic setting, or for a dyad or a group. In the same way, it can be an effective way to organize and manage time for your siblings at home. And you can look at a way for activity schedules to turn free time into meaningful, structured leisure time. So as I mentioned, there's a potential to decrease challenging behaviors through the use of an activity schedule. Dr. Laquia and her colleagues were able to do a review of the literature on activity schedules and found consistent decreases in challenging behaviors such as destructive behavior, disruptive behavior, elopement, inappropriate vocalizations, laying or falling on the floor, noncompliance, pica, screaming, self-injury, spitting, stereotypy, tantrums, challenging or excessively long transitions, as well as verbal and physical aggression. So that's great, a decrease in those behaviors, but how? So Banda and colleagues were able to provide some insight on how providing a reliable context for what to expect is a possibility for why we see a decrease in a lot of these interfering behaviors. So using an activity schedule, we can prepare our learners for events like trips to the doctor, trips that are not in their normal schedule, for new visitors coming, for times when they're going to be separated from their caregivers, for tolerance programs or other, potentially non-preferred events. Knowing when, for how long events are going to occur could potentially be how we're seeing a decrease in some of these interfering behaviors. Creating structure within the day or within the home program school day. It's also a great opportunity, as I mentioned, for facilitating appropriate communication and for offering choices when possible. The communication might center around requesting changes to the schedule because the schedule is there to guide that conversation, maybe skipping activities, maybe adding activities. So as we look to decrease interfering behavior, we also want to consider that we're looking to increase adaptive behaviors. So that same review by Dr. Luqui and her colleagues cited engagement, compliance, on-task behavior, on-schedule behavior, appropriate play, social engagement, task correspondence, appropriate transitions, self-regulation, and of course, independence as some of the adaptive behaviors with an increase. In my own work, I've noticed that we can increase the time that our learners are on task during preferred activities with limited adult supervision. And I also, excuse me, I also have found that limited prompting creates a less intense environment for everyone. So when I say less intense, I'm looking to describe an environment in which our learners require minimal prompting, minimal physical prompting, so that they're moving in their own space and there's more physical proximity between the learner and the instructor. I'm also considering how minimal vocal prompts and instructions create a more quiet environment for the learner and the instructor. We can also think about how if we've taught our learners to be as independent as we can, and we're able to observe maintenance of those skills, we can trust in their ability to navigate through their environment without us as the instructors waiting on edge to jump in and assist or correct errors through all of their tasks and throughout their day. Also, speaking a bit on autonomy and privacy, this is a great reason to consider how activity schedules can be beneficial for our learners throughout their lives, particularly as they get a bit older. Using some of the strategies and principles that we're going to discuss today can be used for things like showering, for dressing, things that we do privately that we can offer our learners an opportunity to be successful while maintaining their privacy as well. And considering autonomy, think about how promoting independence and increasing language facilitates opportunities and choice for our learners. We want that to be available to them. So we should constantly be looking for ways to encourage autonomy as we conduct our programming. It's also a great way to promote generalization. If you're teaching through long response chains and your teaching schedule following skills that we work on at home, we're teaching them to independence, we're really building ourselves out, we might be able to generalize to school and vice versa. If we're working on these skills at school and we're fading ourselves out appropriately and we're creating the most independent skills that we can, those things that our learners learn at school, we may be able to transition a lot easier to the workplace or to home. And more independence would likely facilitate more social and vocational opportunities for our learners. So for those of you who are interested in using an activity schedule at home, for my parents, for my home programmers, or people who are just curious, we are going to take a look at the different kinds of schedules and what they entail. So you might like to use a full day schedule for your learner. That's from when they wake up until they go to bed at night. A schedule like that might include activities like eating breakfast, brushing your teeth, your hygiene routine, getting dressed, packing up for school, or these days getting situated for remote learning. You might choose to have a schedule within the remote learning. Then when it's time to have lunch, when it's time for your leisure time, when it's time for your home program, when visitors are coming, when the extracurricular activities are happening, when it's dinner time, when you might have more leisure time after dinner, when it's time for your bath or shower, when it's time for your nighttime routine, for bedtime. We can put all of these activities in and let our learners know when they're going to happen. You might say, I don't really need the full day, but I'd like for the leisure time for my learner to be more structured. So I like to make sure that when you have a leisure schedule, you're not sticking to the same few activities. You want to figure out, maybe through a preference assessment, maybe through interviews with a caregiver, what the preferred leisure activities for your learner are. So some suggestions that I have for you based on what I do with some of my clients: structured time on the iPad, of course. Coloring, color by number, is a really nice, clear beginning and end activity, nice close-ended activity. Go Noodle videos, art projects, music, watching music videos, making collages, building structures, playing with Legos, doing a crossword puzzle, doing a word search, doing connect the dots, playing outside, doing puzzles, playing computer games, or watching television. Now, you might have a leisure schedule where you have 3 activities. So let's make sure that you're rotating those activities. We want to keep it fun for our learners. You might choose to just have an activity schedule in order to structure your home program. So some things that I like to include in my home program activity schedules are pictures of the home program staff so that the learner knows who is coming and when. It also helps as a nice primer for initiations, to greet the instructor when they arrive. I like to include pages for each skill acquisition program that's going to be worked on that day. If breaks are embedded in the session, we want to include that so that the learner knows when their breaks are coming. Any other activities that might go on during the home program, you can put that in the schedule. Community outings that might happen, put it in the schedule. And events that might occur during the session, put it in the schedule. Another great use for an activity schedule could be during remote learning. Now, for this, I highly recommend that you coordinate with the team facilitating your remote learning so that you can make sure that the order of the activities or the activities that are happening or the staff that are going to be pictured in the schedule are accurate, because again, the point of this is to create a reliable context for our learners. So we want to make sure that it's correct and accurate. It's the point of the exercise. So you would include pictures of your school staff, pages for the school day activities and programs, let them know when breaks are going to happen, let them know when meals are going to happen, let them know what activities are going to happen and when, and any other events that might occur during remote learning. This is especially helpful when there's something different about the day, so that it doesn't just happen out of nowhere, but the learner can see in their schedule ahead of time, like, okay, like I normally have this kind of day, but today I'm going to the doctor and I see that and I'm going to prepare for it. I know that it's coming. You can also use activity schedules with more than one learner, as I mentioned earlier, and we'd call that joint schedules, when you have more than one learner following an activity schedule and they're working simultaneously. So within this, you can have activities that are going to be done independently for each learner, and then activities that are going to be done, maybe with an adult at home or a home team member, parent, and then the activities that are done together. You could have them play board games together, hide and seek, playing card games, reading together, pretend play activities. There are a lot of things that you can include when you've got a schedule for more than one learner. So the way that this might look, you've got Billy and Sally, and they are both on their joint activity schedule. So the first thing in the schedule, maybe they're doing it together. So, okay, I see in my schedule, Billy says it's time to play Candyland with Sally, and he's got his initiation in the schedule. He's going to go to Sally. Sally, do you want to play Candyland? Sally's, oh yeah, I want to play Candyland. They play Candyland. When they're done, they go back to their schedules. Now Billy has an ADL task, and Katie has, Sally has their independent reading task. They go off, they do their own thing. When they're finished, they come back. Maybe they have another activity together. So they're working in tandem in this way. Now that's all that I'm going to review on joint schedules, but if you find that really interesting, I would definitely recommend checking out some of the literature here. Betts and colleagues demonstrate the efficacy of using an activity schedule for increasing peer engagement, cooperative play, and turn taking during activities. I like this because the authors additionally taught making initiations to the other learners in order to play as part of their work. So I think that that's a great part of that. The study here by Broadhead and colleagues is also super cool. They've shown that we can teach children how to play hide and seek using an activity schedule and schedule following behavior. So not only is this an excellent application of the science, but the result is also super adorable. Another article that I highly recommend for those of you working with older learners is this work by Dr. Erin White and her colleagues, which provides us with some research and tools on the efficacy of using activity schedules for learners who are working on pre-vocational tasks together. So that's something new and interesting and different, and I would definitely recommend checking these out. So a quick vocab lesson before we get into the super fun stuff. Let's talk about attending. That's a word that you're going to hear a lot. So attending could mean a variety of things. Specifically, attending behavior might be your learner is seated, their hands and feet are in a neutral position, they're looking or oriented towards the teacher or the materials, and there is an absence of any behavior that interferes with learning. So that's typically what the definition for attending would be. In the context of what we're talking about today, it's mostly going to be providing one's attention to the relevant stimulus or materials. So if I were to say the learner is attending to a video model, it means that they're looking at the video model, and when they're done, they're going to do what it is that is expected or required of them following watching the video model. They're attending, they're focusing on it. Interfering behavior. I know some people say problem behavior, some people might say maladaptive behavior. My preference, I use the language of interfering behavior. My definition for that is any behavior which is unique to the individual learner, which interferes with their ability to learn or acquire skills or interferes with their safety. So if I'm saying interfering behavior, and you're like, what is interfering behavior? That's what interfering behavior is. Now we're going to teach our activity schedules and the independent activities within them using behavior chains. A behavior chain is a sequence of individual specific responses which must occur in order that when performed will produce the desired target outcome. So in a behavior chain, each response occasions the following response. That's our Cooper definition. Behavior chains. Okay, so I have the definition, but like, what is a behavior chain? Behavior chain could be washing your face, brushing your teeth, taking the bus, loading and unloading the dishwasher, washing dishes, making an art project, showering, tying your shoes, setting the table, getting dressed, sanitizing the counter, making a sandwich, doing your homework, making the bed, completing chores, using a debit card, using the exercise bike or treadmill, cooking with a recipe, playing a board game, doing a puzzle, painting your nails. So all of these behavior chains are a string of individual behaviors which make up one full task. So washing your face, the behaviors in washing your face might be splashing your face with water, pumping the soap into your hand, and maybe you rub the soap on your face. So those are all individual behaviors, but when you put them together, you have a behavior chain. But wait, there's more, a task analysis. Taking the steps of a complex skill and breaking them into smaller, teachable units. This list of steps in your behavior chain is your task analysis. So let's get started. You're going to make your task analysis. Step 1, you're going to choose the task based on the age of the learner, their skill level, and their experience. And this is important. You want to choose something that is appropriate, functional, makes sense for your learner, and something that is in their repertoire enough that they'll be able to be successful with it. So for example, you want to teach your learner to unload the fine china from the dishwasher. Now that sounds like a great task for a 17-year-old with great fine motor skills. That does not sound like a good task for an 8-year-old with maybe less developed fine motor skills. So we want to make sure that we're choosing our tasks in a way that's going to make sense for our learners. So you've chosen your task. Step 2, you're going to watch somebody engage in that task and complete the task. And as they go, you're going to write out the steps. You write the steps out, that's your TA. You write the steps out that are going to need to be taught. Step 3, you're going to consult someone who regularly performs the task on your TA and edit it as needed. So let's say we're going with washing the dishwasher and you're doing this in a home program setting. You watch mom do it, you write the steps out, and you're like, okay, I've got my TA. And then you ask maybe another caregiver in the home and you say, this is something that we're going to be teaching the learner. Like, these are the steps that we have. Is this how you usually do it? And they might say, you know, I also do this, or I don't really do that. And in this way, you might be able to edit your TA, that's short for task analysis, your TA, to make sure that it's going to remain consistent across those that are working with the learner, that are teaching the learner, and that it's going to work for everyone. Step 4, you're going to perform the task yourself following your own TA, and you're going to edit it as needed. So you've got your TA because you watched mom unload the dishwasher, somebody else in the house gave you some tips on it, then you go to do it and you're like, oh, you know what? Like, they forgot that you have to open the thing to put the soap in. Like, that's an important part of that. I didn't notice that. I'm going to put that in my TA. Step 5, you might find that you need to make further edits based on your learner's progress. You know, sometimes there are things that we overlook because we're so used to engaging in the task that when we start to teach it, we say, oh, you know, this one thing didn't come naturally. Let me make sure that that's included so that I can teach that. And don't forget, choose and set up your data collection system. We always want to be taking data, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that later. So here's a really fun video that could show you what could go wrong if you're not very careful with writing your task analysis. So this is the exact instructions challenge.
Make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich?
Yeah.
Step 1, get 2 pieces of bread out. Got 'em. Get a butter knife and get some PB. Take 1 piece of bread, spread it around with the butter knife.
No. Oh, so maybe a good step to add in there would be open the peanut butter, dip the knife in the peanut butter, and then you want to spread it.
Dad, with the peanut butter.
I'm just doing what it says. It says take 1 piece of bread, spread it around with the butter knife.
Hold on.
Get some jelly, rub it on the other half of the bread.
Okay.
I
Hey,
apologize.
hey,
I see
Marissa.
now that you can't see that. Hold on one second.
Okay, great. I was just gonna interrupt. Thank you.
So sorry about that. Okay. Let's see. Okay. I am sorry about that, guys. All right. You should be all set now.
Step 1, get 2 pieces of bread out. Got 'em. Get a butter knife and get some PB. Take 1 piece of bread, spread it around with the butter knife.
No, Dad, with the peanut butter.
Oh, Dad.
I'm just doing what it says. It
Following
says
the
take
TA.
1 piece of bread, spread it around with the butter knife.
Hold on.
Get some jelly, rub it on the other half of the bread.
Oh, man.
No,
See,
Dad,
these are things that we
open it.
overlook. You got to open
It
it.
doesn't say to do that. Put the breads together on top of each other. Take a big bite.
No peanut butter, no jelly, no fun. So it's a very cute video, but when you're making your task analysis, you want to make sure that you're not overlooking all of the little steps. You're going to teach someone how to do something that they've never done before. So you want to be very careful, very specific. So here is an example of a task analysis and corresponding picture schedule that I have for one of my learners. Now you're going to look at this and you're like, wow, that's a really long list. Well, yes, because there are a lot of small, intricate steps in the chains that we perform on a daily basis. So I want him to go in and use the toilet, but using the toilet isn't just using the toilet. It's lifting the toilet seat. It's using the toilet. It's putting the entire toilet seat down. You're welcome. It's flushing and then washing hands. That's a skill that he already had in his repertoire. We had previously taught that, so we didn't have to include all of those steps. So washing hands, drying hands. Now for the face wipes, it's more than just, okay, here's the step, wipe your face. You first have to open the wipes. You have to take a wipe out. You got to close your wipes so they don't dry up. Wiping the face appropriately, which is something that we've worked on within session, throwing the wipe away. So that's just to give you an example, and we're going to go over the data collection system soon, but the columns that you see to the right of these steps is where you would mark your correct or incorrect for those responses. Now you could use a picture schedule. You could use a text schedule, or you could make one like this where the text and the pictures are paired. I like to do that. I think it's a nice incidental teaching opportunity for some word recognition, for pairing, the words toilet with a picture of the toilet. I think it's helpful. Now, if you're fading your schedule out, you might choose to make the stimuli on the picture card lighter. You might cut the picture card into pieces. You might make everything smaller. Depends on your learner and what works best for them. You could also choose to not fade out your schedule. The argument for this that I use is that if you're doing something that's going to be at home and you have a very small, discrete schedule that you use for it, for myself, I am constantly writing down reminders. When I go to the supermarket, I make myself a grocery list. I don't go there and wing it. That can be trouble. So you have the option to not fade it, but you can certainly work on fading it if you think that that's what's going to work best for you. So there are a few different ways to approach teaching a behavior chain. You might also call it a long response chain. Few ways to teach your behavior chains. So there's the forward chain. When you teach with a forward chain, the behaviors identified in the task analysis are taught in their naturally occurring order. So first, second, third. The instructor prompts the learner to complete the target step, and then reinforcement is delivered for the first step when criterion is met, and then for the first 2 steps. And then reinforcement happens once the first 3 steps are completed, and so on. On the other end, we have backward chaining. So for backward chaining, the instructor completes all of the steps in the behavior chain up until the last behavior, and then that's the target behavior that we're going to prompt the learner to perform and then deliver reinforcement for. Now, as far as the schedule for reinforcement goes, first you're going to reinforce just for that last step. Once that last step is mastered and it's at criterion, you're going to deliver reinforcement when the learner performs the second to last step and the last step. And then reinforcement will occur after the third to last, the second to last, and the last step.
Now's a good time to give a keyword.
Thanks, Ray. So the first keyword is independence. Independence. So if you're here for some CEUs, you're going to have to email us the keywords, and your first keyword is independence. I'll give you a second to write that down. All right, so forward chaining, backward chaining. Here is a pro tip. Whether you are teaching with forward or backward chaining, run several consecutive teaching trials of the target step. So mass trial it. Fade your prompts across trials or sessions, and then you prompt your learner through all of the other steps. The reason that I like doing this, and this is just the way that I was taught, and this is the way that I practice and the way that I train the therapists that I work with. The reason that I like this is because you are giving the learner exposure to practicing all of the steps in the chain. You could also step out of the chain, and you can take that target step and you can mass trial it, and in order to practice it that way before you return to the entire chain. But I like doing it this way. Next, there's total task chaining. So each step is taught during teaching sessions, with the trainer providing prompts for all steps. So closer to the method that I use, right? So all steps for which the learner requires assistance. This method is preferred when the learner has many of the specific responses required to complete the chain already in their repertoire, but just needs to learn them in sequence. So, I can get peanut butter, I can open peanut butter, I can spread peanut butter on bread, but I just need to learn how to put those things together, and I need to remember the order that they go in. Another time that you might choose to use total task chaining, or total task presentation, it's also called, is when the learner has strong imitative skills. You might also choose to do this when the learner experiences more challenges with skill acquisition, because again, it's more practice for all of those steps. It's also helpful when the sequence is not too long or too complex, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it when the chain is a bit longer. It's just a preferred method when the sequence is a bit shorter. So let's get into some case examples. First, I'm going to share with you a full day binder schedule for one of my 11-year-olds with autism. We've been working on this since he was about 9 years old. His program goals focus on academics, on independent daily living skills and self-care skills, also on task engagement overall, including during leisure time, and on functional communication and an increase in production of language. So here is his schedule. We start off with his favorite therapist coming, then it's time for breakfast, and that schedule's in there. Next, he's got his first video call. I have spots there where we can put pictures of the staff as it rotates every day. Next, he's gonna freshen up. He's gonna take his schedule with him, and he's gonna go and complete his freshening up routine. He also gets dressed right after that, so he'll usually take both of those with him, and he goes and he does his thing. He'll go and do his next video call. We leave room for the instructors. I like to get up and walk around. We go to the park, we take a walk, or he chooses another activity so that he can move around. Next, he helps to make his lunch. He sets up for lunch, including cleaning up after. And his next therapist arrives to work with him during remote learning. And that's good. It helps him to, we practice a little bit saying hi to her. He's gonna get into his ADL work, spraying and wiping, back to the desk to work on reading and spelling, cleaning up. And I like often to make sure that we're keeping a nice balance of giving instructions when they would occur naturally and having the schedule be the discriminative stimulus for the instruction. So for example, that cleaning up page, cleaning up is something that he's going to hear throughout the day, throughout his life from other people. So he'll see it and then we'll give him a more specific instruction. You know, say, hey, can you go and clean the playroom, please? Or we'll prompt him to say, what do I clean? And we'll say, oh, you know what, you can go and clean in the kitchen. Something like Go Noodle that he does by himself, we're not going to say anything for him. And be like, it's time for Go Noodle, go and do your Go Noodle. This is an independent activity. So this is something that the schedule is going to be what prompts him to go and do that. So he takes his video, he goes and he types it into Go Noodle. Maybe he's going to do roller coaster, lots of options. We rotate these, make sure that he's accessing all the great Go Noodle videos. Working on typing. Treadmill, this was his first visual schedule. He's great on the treadmill. We're faded out of view. He's safe, he's exercising, he's happy. His next therapist comes. Again, we like to keep it predictable. We know who's coming when. He was just on the treadmill, got to go freshen up again, all sweaty. And then we go into packing for swim. We're just practicing packing. And you know, he can see in his schedule that we're not actually going. So that eliminates possible confusion. We practice reading our words. We will play some cards together. Right now with that, we're working on initiating the instructor. Let's play. Building can be alone or in tandem. Take out the garbage, got to earn your keep. Time to watch TV. Pick his show, bring it with him if he needs some help setting it up. And after that, it's dinner time. He's got his schedule, clean up when he's done, and then that's that. That's his full day schedule, a day in the life, right? So the skills that were in that binder were taught either as long response chains, or some of those were discrete trial programs. We had a nice balance of both. I also like to keep a balance with a program like this for a learner who is programming full day, making sure that we have a nice balance of time sitting down at the table versus time moving around. So I'm not going to put typing, reading, and building structures all three in a row. I'm more likely to put building structures, and then we're going to get up and do treadmill, and then we're going to freshen up, and then we're going to sit down and do typing, and then we're going to get up and do Go Noodle, just so that we're not sitting all day. Mastered skills in any of the programs that we do are then transferred to parents or generalized to parents and caregivers. We say, here are the things that, you know, we've taught to mastery. We are out of view, so this is something that we would like to make sure that he can do when we're not present at all. So that's something that you might want to include when we're not here, maybe on the weekend. We have a behavior intervention plan, which is run simultaneously by the home team. Prior to that intervention plan being in place, the motivational system that was involved with this was that he would get a check mark for every completed activity. And then once he earned 4 check marks or 5 check marks, he would go and he would take a break and just kind of be on his own and do his own thing with no demands, no instruction for a little while. That's could be an option if you have a learner that can work with that sort of delay to reinforcement. Whenever you're able to wait until the end of a chain to provide, the big reward, great. So self-monitoring, as I said, he was initially moving those tokens for himself. That could be something that you consider for working with your learners. And some prerequisites here, responding to and setting a timer, something that he does frequently within the schedule. I think that's a really handy skill. So we're gonna chat a little bit about how to teach that later on. And also some experience with the acquisition of long response chains. We wanna make sure that we are not bombarding him with all day long. We're teaching long response chains. Over time, he's acquired these skills, and now that they're mastered, you've noticed, there's quite a few of those in there. So he's been working on those for a while. And then identical and non-identical matching are skills that he uses as far as getting his materials based on the corresponding pictures in his schedule or text. So another way that you could present the schedule is in a list form. So a listed schedule, this is for an after-school program that I was doing with one of my 15-year-olds with autism, so a little bit older. His program goes focused on social skills and communication with family members, on independent daily living skills, self-care skills, leisure skills, and on task engagement overall, including during leisure time. And this learner received 2 to 3 hours daily, Monday through Friday, and also sometimes on the weekends of in-home ABA therapy. So that did give us ample time to work on the schedule with him. So his schedule might look like this. He'd come home from school, he would unpack, make a snack, play Connect 4 with his sister, go and unload the dishwasher, walk the dog in the backyard, and then set an alarm for 5 o'clock, and then play on the iPad until 5 o'clock. Then it's time to shower, time for the dinner schedule, time to brush Buddy, and time for the nighttime schedule. So the way that this was set up, so this learner had his reading was at a 5th grade comprehension level. So we were able to have all of his schedules, the visual schedules, like as you saw for that freshening up routine, his were all text. So they were literally lists of instructions. And he had a hanging file folder, and within all of those files, he had the corresponding tasks. So if he saw brushing Buddy, he'd take out his brushing Buddy schedule because it matched with what was on, and he could read, say, brushing Buddy. Okay, I go to the brushing Buddy tab. The other thing that I like about this schedule that we were able to work with the learner on was by putting the iPad, which was highly preferred, sort of in the middle part there. We were teaching him that the sooner you get your things done, and you see, these are mostly chores, playing with your sisters could be a chore, maybe not. You got to walk the dog out in the dishwater, got to hang out with your sister. And then when you're done with all that stuff, you can do your thing. So if you do those things appropriately and you don't need any redirection and you do them at a speed that is functional, well, then more time for you on the iPad. So if we start at 4 o'clock and it takes you, a half hour to complete the things that you have to do, reasonable, then you get a half hour on the iPad or on the iPad. But if you're off task and we have to repeat things and we have to go back and, we have to start over, we have to redirect, and you're stuck, now it's 4:55 and you only have 5 minutes of iPad time, it's quite a delay to reinforcement, right? Well, maybe next time there will be some motivation to remain on task and work quickly. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to work for everyone. You should take data on it to see if it's effective, but this was something that worked really well for this learner. So, we had some long response chains in there. We had some discrete trial teaching. As with the previous learner, mastered skills were generalized to parents. We had a behavior intervention and motivational system run simultaneously by the home team during his schedule. And then as far as self-monitoring, we had our learner checking off activities after he completed them. So some prerequisites for this learner: setting and responding to a timer. For this learner, he set his timer on his iPod. He also had some experience with the acquisition of long response chains. And as I mentioned before, his reading comprehension was at a 5th grade level. So we were able to rely on more text cues than we would with our learner whose reading skills were not quite so advanced, where we used more pictures. So here is a schedule that I did with an early learner. She was a 5-year-old learner with autism. Her program goals focusing on pre-academics, on classroom readiness, on independent daily living skills and leisure skills. And this was her first time learning to follow a schedule. So the prompts in here, we have a lot of auditory prompts.
Hi, Miss Marissa. Let's work.
Now we want her to repeat that. So we give a little bit of space for her to say and orient herself towards me and say, hi, Marissa, let's work.
Time to wash my hands.
Again, she's going to hear this. She's learning to look at the instructor and say, here's what we're doing now. She's making that initiation. She's taking the reins.
Let's learn letters.
Now for this, we have pictures like this. These pictures would correspond directly with the pictures on her bins of materials, such as this
I
one
want
as
to
well.
practice counting.
So while we're teaching that emerging skill of matching, she would match the picture in the schedule to the materials.
Do you want to play a game?
Something like this, we would rotate the games out a lot, so it was more of going to a game area. So we learned to say that and then go there.
Help me practice getting dressed.
And same with this, you know, the let's practice getting dressed. We want to occasion her going to the area where she'd get dressed.
Will you read me a story?
You read me a story. I say yes. We walk together to the bookshelf. We pick out a nice book.
Let's sing and dance.
So something else that we're gonna keep the activity for this variable.
Thank you, Miss Marissa. See you next time.
Some more
Bye.
initiations, nice opportunities to practice some socializing, right? So as with our previous learners, mastered skills were transferred and generalized to parents. And as far as independence and interaction, photos and text on the slide corresponded with photos or text on the material bins in order for the learner to go and retrieve her own materials. So that's identical matching. That was an emerging skill for her. It's a great opportunity to practice incidentally. If she needed to bring the iPad over to where the materials were with her so that she could look at the picture on the iPad and then look at the pictures that were available to her on the shelf, she could absolutely do that. And as I mentioned, she would imitate the audio on each slide while looking at, or at least orienting her body towards the therapist in order to make those initiations. So when this was mastered, she's running her own little home program. She's saying, all right, we're gonna do numbers now. And she goes and she gets her stuff. She sits down. She's like, all right, let's go. Let's do this. It's nice. It's not me going and getting her stuff for her and having her sit in the chair and, you know, telling her, we're gonna do this now. We're gonna do this now. No, she's running the show to an extent. So for my friends who are in schools and clinics, we will talk a little bit about applying the activity schedules at school. So a full day schedule will have each program and each lesson. You can have pictures of the staff members. You can have pictures of when it's lunchtime, when it's leisure time or recess, when there are going to be special events, and when it's the end of the day. For a lot of my learners, particularly younger learners, that end of the day was really important, because as you're transitioning to having a longer school day and you're at school for the first time, you're thinking about wanting to go home, no matter how fun school is, no matter how awesome your teachers are. So having that outlined in the schedule when it's time to go home has been helpful for a lot of my learners. So leisure schedule. As I mentioned, with your leisure schedule at home, you don't want to just have the same few activities and they're doing those activities, you know, every single day. And it's like, oh, well, I changed the order of the activities and you're doing the same few activities. Kids are going to get bored. You want to keep it exciting. You want to make sure that that time is fun for them. So get creative, you know, ask their parents what they might like, ask, you know, take a look at what your own kids like. If they're in a similar age group, ask people that have kids that age. Figure out what your learner likes in that way. Do a preference assessment. Make sure that the things that you're giving them to do are things that they like. This is leisure time, right? So just some more ideas. Structure-based iPad access. It's always good to teach time to put a cap on that, right? So that we're not just sitting in front of the screen. And when I say we, I mean our learners, but we also, right? Coloring, color by number, go noodle, art projects, music and music videos, making collages, building structures, Legos, crossword puzzles, word searches, connect the dots, playing outside. You know, maybe you have a playground. Maybe we can use a joint schedule here so that we have one learner make an initiation. Say, why don't we go play outside? Let's go ask our teacher. Doing puzzles. If your learners enjoy puzzles, you could use Jig Zone. You could use regular puzzles. Playing computer games. You could have the learner watching television or watching clips on Netflix on the laptop, if that's something that's available to them as well. So joint schedules. As with doing a joint schedule at home, you're going to have activities that are done independently and activities that are done with the instructor or therapist, and then activities that are going to be done together. You could have your learners play board games, hide and seek, card games, reading together, pretend play, going outside, things like that. So here is just a generic daily schedule, what we've used with some of my learners in schools. So you're going to start the day with your morning group, maybe. It's a great way to start the day. Then it's time for math. Then your learner might go to piano. You could use text. You could use pictures. You could use text and pictures. In this, you could also include audio prompts like we did for that younger learner, because at school, you know, we are still working with our instructors. Great to know when lunch is, great to know when leisure time is. Maybe you're going to have a social group, some reading. As long as you're making sure that this schedule is accurate and that it's reliable, we're hoping that we'll see some of the same effects that we discussed earlier for decreases in some of those interfering behaviors, it's my own word, interfering behaviors, and an increase in those adaptive behaviors. And of course, we want to end the day with packing up. So leisure schedule for a beginner, right? Maybe this is at school or at a clinic. This was for a 10-year-old with autism that I worked with a while ago. His program goals focused on task behavior, on appropriate engagement, independence, and also transitioning between activities. So we did a preference assessment, and we were able to conclude that these were the things that he liked a whole lot. So it's easier, or it was easier for this learner to transition and to learn to transition and to contact the experience of appropriate successful transitions when he was going from one thing he loved to another thing that he loved. And so with this, we slowly built in some other tasks, and we were able to have him work on a longer schedule. So what you see here is the text for what the name of the activity is, a picture that corresponds with it, and then the time that you see next to it is for him to set the timer. So that's 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes. So as I said, this is his first time learning to follow a schedule. We wanted to generalize that schedule following to the parents via our parent training once it was mastered at school. And prerequisites for this learner included non-identical matching. So the pictures that you see here isn't exactly, you know, there's not a guy holding pink putty just waiting. Like, this is a non-identical matching opportunity. There's putty. He knows that it's putty, and he knows non-identical matching. And so he sees putty, he goes and he retrieves his putty. So independent activities within the activity schedule. Independence, 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 right? So we want to have our learners making social initiations. We want to teach our learners to retrieve and maintain their own materials. This is something that, these are things that we're going to do through our activity schedules. For making the initiations, if you have a learner that reads, you might use a text prompt. If you have a learner that's not reading yet, you might use an auditory prompt. You might model it for them. You might have somebody else model it for them. You could use a voiceover prompt or a pre-recorded prompt. We want to teach our learners to retrieve and maintain their own materials. You can do that, as we mentioned, with identical matching or non-identical matching. Now, in order to facilitate this independence, we need to systematically fade out our presence. So you're systematically fading out adult and instructor presence with acquisition of these skills. And we're going to get into specifically how to do that later, because that is super important. You can use visual or text schedules or visual and text schedules for your long response chains in order to have a visual schedule for your learner to follow. And you want to incorporate independent tasks and activities within that activity schedule. So it's not necessarily that it has to be one schedule of all discrete trial programs. Maybe, as you saw with that first learner, For his home schedule, he has some discrete trial programs that he's working on with his teacher. He has his remote learning, and then he has things that he does on his own, for which I step out of the room and I let him do his thing because he's mastered it and it's independent. So he doesn't need me for those things. He's just doing his own thing. And we can also promote independence within these activity schedules by teaching self-monitoring for motivational systems when possible. You know, of course, if you are working on behavior reduction strategies for interfering behaviors, you do want to make sure that you are maintaining that behavior intervention plan with integrity, even if it means being closer in proximity to the learner when we're looking to build ourselves out, because those interfering behaviors are likely going to impede on independence. And so we want to make sure that we are working with them on decreasing those interfering behaviors and increasing adaptive behaviors as part of this journey to independence. So pro tip, embed schedules, not teachers. You're going to hear me talk a lot about how you want to make sure that you are not you are building yourself out of this, that you are not becoming a prompt, okay? So McDuff, Krantz, and McClanahan in their early work explain it like this. Many intervention packages rely heavily on verbal instructions, on modeling, and on gestures. Because these prompts are often associated with reinforcement during teaching, they may acquire stimulus control over target responses, with the result that the learners may not display target skills in the absence of teachers and prompting procedures. So we want these behaviors under the control of the natural stimulus. So I don't want my learner to set the speed on the treadmill because I'm saying, set the speed on the treadmill, press the button, press the up button, make it go up more, you want to go faster. We want him to know that I have turned the treadmill on. And what I do after I turn the treadmill on is I set the speed, because that is what I was taught to do. And that's what makes sense. And that's what happens next, not because my therapist is telling me to do it. So he'll be able to be independent in that way. If I have to be there to tell him to do it, I'm going to have to always be there to tell him to do it. So listen up, beginners. Tips for first-time activity schedule users. Start small. That full day schedule isn't necessarily how you're going to start, but it's a great place to work up to. So you want to consider scheduling just a few activities while your learner gets the rhythm of schedule following and acquires that skill. Another tip is that you want to start out creating a schedule that is solely, or at least mostly, made up of preferred activities. So think about that learner who was having difficulty with transitions, right? Everything in the schedule is great. So we want our learner to see that it's time to work with the schedule and say, oh, that thing is full of stuff that I like. We don't want our learner to see the schedule and go, oh, everything that's in there is awful. I have to get out of this right away. No, we want to pair the schedule with things that are preferred. We want to make sure that our schedule acquires some of those rewarding properties of those preferred activities. So you're going to do that, and you're going to pair some more. You're going to offer rewards for approaching the schedule, for moving through activities, and you're going to provide those rewards non-contingently throughout the course of the schedule. We want to do this using a variable schedule. Why? Why do we want to use a variable schedule? Because variable schedules of reinforcement strengthen behaviors, and we love strong, maintained, resilient, generalized adaptive behaviors. I like to imagine variable schedules this way. I engage in a behavior because that behavior has been reinforced. I didn't get my reinforcement this time, so I'm probably going to get it next time. I engage in the behavior again. I didn't get reinforcement this time, so it's definitely coming. I engage in the behavior again, and bam, I get my reward, I get my reinforcement. I knew it, and that is why I'm always going to engage in that behavior under those conditions. So you don't know when it's coming, but you do know that it's coming, and so you're going to keep engaging in that behavior. So let's get into teaching. You can teach all of these skills using most to least prompting. You're going to teach and you're going to fade using most to least prompting. You're going to choose your prompt style based on what has been the most successful and what's most comfortable for your learner. I had a parent ask me the other day when we were talking about prompting. She said, okay, well, I get that there's gestures and I get that there's physical prompting, but like, which one am I supposed to use for my learner? Like, which one is right for my son? And he said, well, the way that we're going to figure that out is that we're going to try them all. We're going to see how his acquisition is. We're going to look at our data. When we're using physical prompts, how is his acquisition of this skill? What are our scores look like? What does our data look like? How is his affect when we're doing this? Does this seem aversive? Is he engaging in behaviors that you know signal to you that he's uncomfortable? Like, that might not be the right fit for us. We're going to look at the data and at his affect through, gestures, when we use gestures, when we use physical prompts, when we use tracking, when we use modeling. We want to see what the most effective thing is, and we're going to do that through data collection. Some of our learners might not be able to use physical prompts. Physical prompts may be very aversive, and if that is the case for your learner, don't push it. There are other things that you can do. So when you're teaching most to least and you're fading your prompts, you're going to begin providing the most support. That's where the most in most to least comes from. It's your errorless component. You're leaving no room for error. After some practice, you're going to provide slightly less support. Next, you're going to give your learner more room as you provide even less support. And then finally, you're going to continue to give your learner space, providing the least support, providing support only when it appears that your learner is likely to error. Pro tip: as your learner becomes more fluent with their schedule, let them error. Let them make mistakes. Let them self-correct. Remember, the goal is independence. And if they've got some real progress going and they make a slight mistake and you jump in right away and, no, oh my God, you made a mistake. No, you want to give them a little bit of time, trust them a little bit. Maybe they're going to self-correct. If they don't, then okay, we'll go back to it. If it's going to disrupt the rest of the chain and we need to go in and correct it, go in and correct it. But give your learner a chance to problem solve. It's an incredibly valuable skill.
And now's a great time for the next keyword.
The next keyword is autonomy. Autonomy. I will give you a second to write that down. All right, autonomy. So I will give you an example of fading your physical prompts. Now, I have found physical prompting to be the optimal way, just in my practice, for teaching these long response chains. If that doesn't work for your learner, it doesn't work for your learner. But this is how I generally do it when my learners are able to tolerate physical prompts. So first, you're going to start with your hands on the learner's hands. Next, your hands are going to guide the learner's wrist. After that, your hand is going to guide their forearm. Next, your fingertips are just going to guide their elbow. Next, your fingertips are just guiding the back of their bicep. And then after that, you're at the least. That's where the least and most to least comes from. You're going to wait close by to provide the least intrusive prompt if necessary before your learner errors. Pro tip: don't touch their stuff. Why aren't you going to touch their stuff? You're not going to touch their stuff because if they're going to be independent, you're not going to be there, right? They're going to be on their own. So if you are teaching them to do something and you are, let's say we're doing toothbrushing, and your learner's got an electric toothbrush with a button. The learner has a hard time with the button. Every time he goes to try to press the button, he can't quite do it. So you press it for him. Now, when you're 10 feet away and he's by himself, or it's nighttime and mom's like, oh, he learned how to brush his teeth, with his therapist, so he's just going to go and do it by himself. But I always press the button for him. Well, he's either going to stop because we've interrupted the chain and he doesn't know where to go from there because there's a very discriminative stimulus that's missing. My teacher's missing. Or he's going to do it without pressing the button, which of course, with this example, isn't the end of the world, but don't touch their stuff. They should have their hands on the materials at all times. We want that muscle memory in effect, okay? So teaching and fading using graduated guidance. Using the strategies on the previous slide, except you're only using this physical guidance as needed. You want to remain close to the participant. You're going to hover your hands over their hands, and then you're going to systematically increase your distance as well as the intrusiveness of the prompt. So a moment for differential reinforcement. What does that mean? So when we're differentially reinforcing, independent responses, so responses that were not prompted, that you didn't help, independent responses should yield the best rewards, but prompted responses should still contact some reinforcement in order to signal to the learner that they're correct and to strengthen the response. So an example, an independent response might get a whole cake. Maybe don't give your learner a whole cake, or maybe do, I don't know. But a prompted response is going to get something that is less than that, but still great. So a bite of cake. Now, you just get a bite of cake, but you want a whole cake, you're not satiated and you're still motivated. Pro tip, since we're not using verbal praise, I always like to give the example when we're teaching reinforcement. Independent responses, throw a party, you're going, yay, woohoo! Well, when you're teaching independent skills, as we discussed earlier, we don't want to provide too much vocal interaction. We don't really want to provide any at all. So you might substitute that with some pats on the back, gentle shoulder squeezes. You could deliver tokens. You're standing behind, you move the token board in front, you place a token down, you're very discreet about it. Those are just some ways that you could consider signaling to the learner that they are correct and reinforcing the independent behaviors. You might also, if you have a learner that can tolerate more of a delay for reinforcement and the reinforcement is still meaningful and still reinforces those behaviors, waiting until the end of the chain. That's another opportunity. So a quick lesson in setting the timer. I know you've been waiting. You were so excited for this part, right? So setting the timer. This is a lifelong skill. And it's going to be useful in a variety of environments and a variety of settings. So some prerequisites for this: labeling numbers and counting objects. I'm not going to say it's impossible to teach this skill without those things, but those things are very, very important prerequisites. So step one, you're going to teach your learner to attend to the time that is being set. Now, maybe it will look like this. Maybe it will look like this. Maybe it will look like this. 3 minutes written out. 3 mins, 3 min. For the purpose of this example, we're going to use this one. So you prompt your learner to look at the time. Okay, 3. They've got their timer. You're going to prompt your learner to press the add time button for the corresponding amount of time. So, okay, 3, and now I see a 0, and now I see another 0. Okay, and now I'm going to press start. Now, maybe you have the start prompt as part of your visual, or maybe you just teach the learner that after they've hit that final number, they go and they hit the start button. So you're going to fade your prompts as you would, as we've discussed. You can fade them across sessions, or you can fade them across the trials. So when I say across sessions, that means, okay, for session, I'm going to stop this timer so it doesn't go off. If you're fading across sessions, you're going to say, okay, on Monday, we're teaching with our full prompt, our full physical prompt. On Tuesday, we're teaching with our prompt at the wrist. On Wednesday, we're teaching with our prompt at the forearm. Now, if you're doing it across trials, you're going to say for the first trial, I'm going to do a full physical prompt. For the second trial, I'm going to do a prompt at the wrist. For the third trial, I'm going to do a prompt at the forearm, and so on. For your reinforcement, remember, this is also an independent skill. We want this under control of this, not of, well, it would be useful, to tell your learner go and set a timer, but in order for the most independence, they have something in their schedule that says this, so we want this to be what occasions setting the timer. So this is an independent skill. You want to make sure that you are not building yourself into it too much. So when you're providing reinforcement, you might want to give some tokens quietly, some pats on the back, or as we mentioned earlier, a reward once this task is completed. Now, if you're going to set the timer, you got to respond to it. You got to stop it, right? Full circle. So pretty simple. Step one, when the timer goes off, you're going to guide your learner to the timer. So we're teaching them, I hear this, I do this. Step two, you're going to prompt your learner to press the stop button. And step three, you're going to guide your learner to resume the task which occurred prior to that timed event. You can fade your prompts across sessions. You could fade your prompts across trials. And for reinforcement, again, independent, provide token or pats on the back. This is an independent skill. Something that I like to do with this is I like, when I'm teaching initially, to keep the timer really close by and then fade the distance of the timer so that the timer kind of becomes this middle ground between I'm here for my leisure activity and I'm here for my work task. And now my leisure activity is done. I'm pressing my button, gain a little bit of momentum on the way back to the work task. So we talked about fading our prompts when we're teaching using physical guidance. Now, you can also fade your prompts if you're using gestures with a time delay. So if you are using gestures and you're fading that with a time delay, you're going to indicate or gesture or track the learner towards or through the step immediately. That's your errorless component. Next, you are going to wait a few seconds before providing the prompt if the learner doesn't respond independently. Now, you're only going to provide a prompt when the learner begins to appears that they're going to error or when they're not responding. This method can be useful for learners who don't tolerate physical prompts. And pro tip, don't use vocal instructions or praise. We've talked about this. We don't want to build ourselves in. This is for your independent tasks. If you're doing discrete trial programming and you're working on, labeling and identifying, use vocal praise. It's great. It's not an independent task. If you're teaching brushing teeth, if you're teaching, wiping while you're in the bathroom, if you're teaching making a sandwich, if you're teaching the learner to do anything that they're going to be doing by themselves, don't use vocal praise. An example for fading your prompts if you're using in vivo or video models, you will show the model for the entire step or response. Maybe you'll show it a few times before you give the learner the opportunity to imitate it. You're going to wait a few seconds, 3 to 5 seconds. If the learner responds independently, that's great. We want to reinforce that. If the learner does not respond or errors, we're going to go back and we're going to show the video, or we're going to perform the model again. We only want to show the model when the learner appears that they're going to error or when they are not providing a response. Pro tip for this, make sure your learner has the prerequisite of attending to and imitating a model. If your learner does not have a history of attending to the model, if your learner doesn't have the skill of imitating a model, this isn't going to be effective for them. So this is not the kind of strategy that you would use. Since that's all I'm going to say on video modeling, I want to make sure that you have some research if you're interested. So we have some research on teaching children with autism to play a video game using video modeling, which I think is pretty cool. We've also got using an iPod, or it might be an iPhone these days. That was 11 years ago, but using an iPod and teaching that through using a video model. We've also got a little bit of both worlds, the video modeling and activity schedules in our next study. So using video models to teach following visual schedules. And then we have Dr. Tom Buggy has a really great overview on something called self-video modeling or video self-modeling, wherein it's exactly what it sounds like. You are helping the learner to engage in the skill, you're recording this, and then the learner is serving as their own video model. So they are viewing a model of themselves engaging in the task, and that is serving as their video model. So that's pretty cool. So you are going to teach and fade, and you're going to collect data on independence as well as the acquisition. So you want to make sure that they've got the skills, and you want to make sure that they can engage in these skills on their own. So you're going to fade some more. Once your learner is moving fluently through their schedule, and that's what your data says, it's time to get out of their way. First, you're going to track their independence with the instructor within 5 feet. Next, you're going to track their independence with an instructor within 10 to 15 feet. And you want to begin stepping out of their view periodically so that they start getting used to the idea of sometimes there's an instructor present, sometimes they're not, but my behavior needs to remain the same so that it's not this abrupt shift to suddenly I can see them, suddenly I can't. So I like the idea of stepping in and out of view for that reason. Next, you're going to track their independence with the instructor maybe in the doorway to the room, stepping in and out. Next, you'll track their independence with an instructor out of view, and now you're stepping in periodically. And then finally, you're going to track their independence with the instructor out of view, out of the room. So get creative. I know you're like, but how am I going to track their independence if I can't see them? Find a way to see them. So you could use a nanny cam, you could use a Zoom call or a FaceTime. I've done things where I put my laptop in the room and I turn the screen so that it's dark. And then I'm watching from my phone in the other room to make sure that the learner's on task. You could also have a novel person step in at this time and have them make sure that the learner is on task as well, because being able to perform this skill alone is valuable, and being able to perform the skill in the presence of others is valuable as well. Show me the data, because we're using applied behavior analysis, so we're taking data, right? Baseline, you got a baseline first. Baseline is the condition in which the independent variable is not present. So what does that mean? That is your learner's performance before you start teaching. So what they can do before you have started with any of your teaching, any of your prompting, any of your intervention. For a long response chain, both in baseline or during teaching, you might choose to use the single opportunity method. So when you use the single opportunity method, you're collecting data on the learner's ability to perform the tasks in their sequence correctly and in order. All of the steps for the first error, all steps following the first error are scored as incorrect. So let's say, for example, we're teaching the learner to set the table. So the learner gets the plate, he did that independently, that's a plus. He puts the plate on the table, it's a plus. He gets the cup, he did it on his own, it's a plus. Puts the cup on the table, it's a plus. Gets the napkin, that's a plus. Now he's got the napkin and he's supposed to put it on the table and he goes to put it in the trash. So that's not correct. You're going to score that as incorrect. You're going to correct that. And then if you're baselining, you might choose to stop there. If you're teaching, you might prompt him through the rest of it, and we're going to score the rest of those steps incorrectly. Now, once you get to this first error, if you're doing the single opportunity method, this is where it ends. But if you're using the multiple opportunity method, this is just one step in the sequence. So if you're using the multiple opportunity method, you're collecting data on the learner's ability to perform the tasks in the sequence correctly. So this is more about, can they engage in these behaviors? Whether they're doing them in order or not, are these behaviors in the learner's repertoire? So when an error occurs, the instructor guides the learner to engage in the next step. So we've got those first 5 steps, correct and independent, good. Now it's time to put the napkin on the table. He goes to put it in the trash. I'm going to correct that, and then I'm going to step back. So I'm not going to prompt him through the rest of the sequence. We're not going to stop. He's just, I'm correcting him there, and I'm stepping back. Okay, he goes and he gets the fork. He does that independently, puts the fork on the napkin independently. He gets the spoon, and we go to put the spoon in the sink. Now that's not right. I'm going to guide him to put the spoon on the napkin, and that's where we end with that sequence. So here's an example of a task analysis with your room for data for an activity schedule. So for the whole full schedule. So the first step would be approaching the schedule, attending to the page, making an initiation if that's going to be part of it, retrieving the materials if there are materials, completing the task, returning the materials, and then you're going to go back up to step 1, where once the learner returns the materials, that occasions I go back to my schedule now. So taking data, you take data as you go. The behavior happens, you're going to score it then. You can't take your data before because you don't know what the performance is going to be. And you can't take, it's not that you can't, but you shouldn't wait until they've performed the whole sequence to take the data after, because we'd rather you not rely on your memory and you make sure that you're doing it in the moment so that you can be sure that it's accurate. For fun, you could also keep additional data on the duration of activities to assess fluency over time. That's what I do for fun. Now, an example of your task analysis, once it is filled out, it might look like this. So I also like to indicate on the data sheet which activity the learner is engaged in for each column. So you could scribble that, or you could, as you're making your data sheet, leave room for that at the top or at the bottom so that I know, okay, here in this first column, he was freshening up. In the second column, we were doing some discrete trial instruction. Third column, so you can assign those columns as you go. Now, you wouldn't write that on your data sheet as something that you're going to print out every time, because you want to change the order of those activities. So that's something that you would write in on a daily basis. You might also choose to use an affect rating scale as you go, or do preference assessments frequently in order to determine the learner's interest in activities, because you also risk the chance that if the learner is not enjoying these activities, you might start to see some escape maintained behavior. And we don't want that. We want the learner to be enjoying their task, and we want them on task. I also always prefer for myself, and I encourage my staff to keep detailed notes for not only when things are going well, but for when there are errors, so that we can use that to guide our programming. So an example here might say, after returning the materials for the third activity, Jay walked in the opposite direction of the schedule. So I'm going to score approaching the schedule as a minus. Redirected him back. He continued to attempt to orient his body away. Unsure of what he was looking for, I prompted him with "I want," and Jay stated that he needed the bathroom. So we see here that there's not a skill deficit at play, and there's not necessarily a performance deficit. There was a moment where his attention was, okay, I have to communicate that I need to go to the bathroom, right? That's a possibility, that the reason that he was not engaging in those things is because he was working on processing this, this statement that he needed to go to the bathroom. So we provided some language for that, and we practiced it. During the last activity, Mom arrived home with pizza. He attempted to abandon the activity, requesting, "I want pizza," because great, like we requested bathroom, we got bathroom. So now I see pizza, I want pizza. Well, we prompted Jay to ask Mom, "When is dinner?" So she replied, "After your TV program." Well, we directed him back to his schedule, and we said, okay, well, when is pizza? Well, pizza's after your TV program. So find your TV program, find your dinner page, put your dinner page in. Now I know when it's happening, and all is well. So we directed him to add the dinner page into the schedule, and he remained on task for the remainder. So we saw that that was effective for him. Doesn't mean that it's going to be effective for every learner, but it's something that we have seen effective in some of our home programming. So let's level up. Now that you've got the basics, let's think about how we can enhance our learners' schedules. Grow. So we talk about how when you first get started, you want to start with just a few super preferred activities. Well, once our learner is an ace at following the schedule, they're walking up, they're saying, "Let's play Candyland." They're getting the Candyland, they're bringing it to the table, they're finished, they're putting their materials away, they're going back to their schedule. You're just stepping back and they're just doing their thing. Okay, well now let's incorporate some more activities. Let's incorporate things outside of leisure, outside of highly preferred. Let's put our daily living skills in there. Let's put our self-care skills in there. Let's add in our skill acquisition programs. Let's add in our community outings. So all of the schedules, most of the schedules that we gave examples for that you've seen throughout the presentation are for longer schedules. So we work up to that. You want to add, expand, and grow. So you can lengthen it in that way. Maybe you want to do a full day schedule. Maybe that's something that works for your learner, you know, particularly when we have our learners at home right now during remote learning. It's a very long time to be in one place, and having a full day schedule breaks up the day and provides structure. It provides structure for our learners, it provides structure for our parents and our caregivers. And with a full day schedule, that's something that you can also maintain when you're taking trips, or when you're when there are out of the ordinary events occurring in order to prepare. Something that I like about schedules that you create on the iPod or the iPad or the iPhone or even on an Apple Watch is that they're very discreet when you do go out, maybe into the community, or maybe you're out at a job training site, or maybe you're out on vacation. You know, having the schedule on the iPad is a lot more personal, it's a lot more private, and it's also a lot easier for the person facilitating the schedule than carrying around this gigantic binder. So binder's good for home, binder's good for school, but think about how you can generalize those to other settings. So something else that, you know, we talked about throughout the presentation is how you can take the context of an activity schedule to teach a lot of incidental language, a lot of things around choice, and a lot of things around the timing of events. So teaching words like now, later, before, after. If you have your activity schedule and you have the events laid out in this way, there's going to be correspondence between these words, right? So that's a good functional context in which you can teach a lot of that language. So I would like to say thank you to Ray Cepeda and the ABA Skills team for hosting this evening and for giving me the opportunity to discuss my favorite thing in the whole world, which is activity schedules and long response chains. I'd also like to thank my first supervisor, Dave Bine, because he got me into this. And of course, my mentors at Alpine Learning Group, Amira and Kelly, for introducing me to the beauty of teaching independence through activity schedules and long response chains. And thanks so much to my numerous friends and colleagues and families for their input, suggestions, and feedback on this presentation.
That was fantastic. Absolutely amazing. Yeah,
Thanks.
love it. Okay, so let's get to some questions. So can you just talk a little more specifically about how and when you reward while teaching during the schedule, during the individual components of the schedule?
Sure. I'm sorry. I've just frozen here for a second. Let me, okay.
Okay, because we could, there you go, great.
So speaking a little bit more on how rewards can be provided throughout the schedule.
Right, so are you like in like every step afterward, because you touched on it briefly and someone's just asking about some more specifics.
Sure. So depending on your learner's individual motivational system, when you're, let's say your learner works with a 10-piece token board. When you're teaching, initially when you're teaching some of these independent skills, so let's say we're teaching your learner with the 10-piece token board to unload the dishwasher, and we are mass trialing opening the dishwasher. As we're mass trialing it, we might provide a token each time that step is completed. Now, we are going to want to fade that eventually so that the learner is opening it and then moving on to the next step without that token interrupting. So rather than reinforcing every single response, you're going to fade that either to a fixed schedule that is less or to a variable schedule that is less. I always prefer variable schedules. So now we're starting out, we're reinforcing every single correct time. Now we're going to reinforce every other correct time. Now we're going to reinforce the third time and then the 8th time. And now we might just reinforce once during that time, and then reinforcement will come at another time. Once these skills are mastered or have been, let's say there's 10 steps in the chain that you're teaching, and there are 8 steps that are mastered. You're not going to be providing tokens. You're just going to be letting that learner move through those mastered steps. And now we're at the point where we're close enough to the end where the reward might just come at the end. The reward could be a break. It could be a token for the completion of that task. Maybe it's a quick snack. I think that you want to take a look at how long your learner can continue to perform with integrity before they require that break or that snack or that token. So you'll assess that, of course. You're not just going to guess. You're going to say, okay, they're responding consistently until about the 8th trial. Or maybe it's time-based, like they can go 15 minutes before they require a break or a signal that they've done things correctly. I have one learner that I was working with where we were really struggling with his motivational system, because it just, you ever work with one of those kids where you're just like, he just doesn't want anything. He just doesn't like anything. So we were in one of those situations where, of course, that's not true, but it feels that way sometimes. So I said, you know what, let's just scrap all of this for a second. Let's just see, let's have him move through his schedule. And at one point, I got the idea that perhaps finishing and task completion and getting through the schedule was going to be more motivating to him than us stopping him in the middle of his schedule and providing a break or a reward. So I said, let's just see how this goes. And sure enough, he just didn't want us stopping him. He didn't want the iPad. He didn't want a snack. He didn't want to go sit in the beanbag chair. He just wanted to stay on task, which was beautiful. He wanted to stay on his schedule. So the motivational system that we ended up putting in was, I think I called it contingent schedule pausing, where when there was interfering behavior, we would pause the schedule. It was super aversive to him, and he just wanted to do his schedule. There are things in his schedule that he liked. He seemed to really enjoy being independent and moving around on his own and completing things on his own, which, you know, makes a teacher really happy. They're like, oh, you just like this stuff. That's great, you know? So it really depends on your learner. I'm sorry, that was a really long-winded answer.
No, it's fantastic. And thank you to Josie, who's watching on Facebook, for that question.
Thank you, Josie.
So this is what I'd like you to just chat about for a minute. So I've seen you with your learner where he had his very advanced and complex schedule, and he was providing tokens to himself. So can you just talk about how you, well, one, like, what was your decision-making process to actually decide that that was going to be the way that he was going to contact reinforcement? And then again, how you would shape that up?
So I felt that walking around with him with his token board, he wasn't too focused, you know, a lot like the other learner that I was just talking about. He wasn't all that focused on me. He was focused on getting things done. He would often request breaks. And so I timed out what the average was. And the average was about 15 minutes. And so if each of these activities were taking, you know, 5 to 8 minutes, we would say, okay, you know, we're going to make sure that once he gets that far in the schedule, once we've had that much time elapse, he's going to get a break as long as he's completed these things. Now, when he completes something, he gives himself that token, right? So in order to get back there, he has to have completed it. He has to have done it on, you know, on task in the absence of interfering behavior. So once that was done, he was allowed to go back to his schedule, and then he would give himself the token. So there was a bit of a delay there, wherein if he's engaging in off-task behavior, it's a longer time until he's going to go and get his token. And it's a longer time until he's going to get enough of those tokens to get a break. And so that was motivating for him in that sense.
Right. So basically, so you're teaching him that he has control over how quickly he can access reinforcement just by suppressing or not engaging in his idiosyncratic behavior. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Right.
So have you ever, or can you teach safety skills using these kinds of schedules?
So I believe so. You can certainly incorporate, you can certainly use an activity schedule to present that you're going to be working on that skill. But as far as teaching safety skills as a long response chain, it really depends on the safety skill. I wouldn't say, for example, crossing the street. It's probably not something that's going to lend itself well, because it's not just, okay, like stepping on the curb, occasions looking both ways, occasions crossing the street. Like a clear road should occasion crossing the street. So that wouldn't be such a rote skill.
Interesting.
You have to think about, you know, the steps in the chain and how when this happens next. When this happens next. So, you know, there can be some variability with a safety skill. What are some other examples that you have in mind?
You know, I don't know. That was a question about safety skills, but I really like what you said about, you know, I think you answered the question. So the answer is really maybe, because if each step in the chain is naturally occurring and leads to the next step, then maybe. But otherwise, you know, probably just using visuals as you've described earlier would probably be a better way to go. That's interesting. See, I really like what you said about how one step has to occasion the next. That makes sense. Okay, so how do you teach a skill like showering with the task analysis and then scheduling? That's always a question that I get asked, so now I'm curious about what your response would be.
You're gonna think I'm joking, but I put on a bathing suit and I get in the shower.
Okay, fair enough.
It's something you could certainly try to be outside the shower and implement those prompts, but in my experience, and I know some of my colleagues have done the same, you're in there. So I have one learner who we were teaching through physical prompts with a visual schedule as well. And then I had another learner who was doing it with a text schedule. So the learner with the text schedule, I didn't have to get in there with him. we practice the integrity of some of these things outside of the shower. So like making sure that like he was rubbing his head enough. He was also a little bit older, so it wasn't really all that comfortable for anyone for me to get in a bathing suit and get in the shower with him. So outside during his program, we'd say, okay, we're going to practice washing your hair. And we'd have the schedule and we'd be standing, in the bathroom by the sink and be pointing to it, say, I wash my hair. Now he's pairing that same schedule with this response. We're just doing it outside of the context of the actual schedule. And I'm doing that right now with another one of my learners. He's learning to dry his body after the shower. So we're practicing that within session, and he's wearing his clothes, and we're just using physical prompts to teach, making sure that he's drying himself. And then we're working, via parent training with mom to make sure that she's generalizing that as well. Great.
So what do you fade first, reinforcement or the person?
Oh, that's a great question. I feel that it's best to fade your reinforcement first, and then fade yourself out. I think that that's optimal because you don't want to make too many significant changes at once. So we don't want it to be like, all right, one day I'm getting 10 tokens for 10 responses and she's here and it's a party, and now all of a sudden she's gone and there are no tokens. We want it to be, okay, this is starting to come under control of the natural stimuli. I'm getting less tokens, but that's okay because I'm focused and I'm fluent, and now she's getting a little bit further away from me. So you have to be there to fade out your reinforcement, and that's part of it. You can't leave and fade out your reinforcement that way. That's why I say, like, if you're going to fade out your reinforcement and yourself at the same time, that's how that's going to go. But if you are still there, you can fade out your reinforcement first, and then you're going to start fading yourself out.
Sorry, I was talking and I was muted at the same time. Not a good combination. Okay, so Marissa, how do you transition from pictures only on a schedule to pictures and words to words only? Is that always the goal, or like how do you make those kinds of decisions?
Well, so it depends on the learner. If I have I really like for private independent self-care skills, I like teaching the learner to whisper the instructions to themselves so that we can then fade the schedule out, because that's not going to be socially stigmatizing. If you're teaching yourself to get dressed and you get dressed by yourself in your room, nobody's going to care if you're going, like, and we do it too, as typical neurotypical adults, like, oh, I have to remember to charge my phone, things like that. So oftentimes for skills like that, I plan to fade the schedule out because the prompts are transferred to the learner. The learner's prompting himself. Now, as far as fading out the schedules, if that's not part of the plan, you can do it a variety of traditional stimulus fading ways. You can start cutting the schedule up, which is hard to do because you made it, but it's one way to do it. You can make the size of things smaller as you fade that out. You can make the words more pale. You can make the pictures more pale and less opaque. So you can do it in that way. You can also, something that I've read about in some of the research that I was doing here, although I can't specifically tell you which study I read it in, is that we were noticing, my researcher friends and I know, in the study that I was reading, they noticed that a lot of times the learner would touch or orient themselves in the direction of the schedule, but not look at it, and then go on and perform the response correctly and perform the chain correctly. So it was almost as if there was this step chained in of like, I orient towards the schedule, but I know what's next. So what I like to do oftentimes with my learners in these situations is, let's say the learner's been working on this for months. They are maintaining criterion. I'm 10 feet away. They're going to go for their schedule one day. I'm going to say, you know what? You don't need it. Go and see how you do without it, and see how they do without it. If they've got that first step, it would be beautiful and wonderful if that step occasions the next step occasions the next step, and the schedule is not what's doing it. And oftentimes with repetition and practice, that's what happens. Think about, you know, when you are driving somewhere that you drive all the time and you're using Google Maps, and Google Maps is giving you instructions, giving you instructions, giving you instructions. It's there, but you remember where to go. You know how to get there. So you one day are gonna be like, oh, I don't really need my Google Maps. Or maybe you're on a call and you're not looking. You're like, oh, I got here. So you might find that your learner practices enough that they can remember what the steps are.
That makes a lot of sense. And that actually just answered one of the other questions. And in regards to Google Maps, I'm completely prompt dependent. I haven't learned anything.
Oh,
So
I like to use ways to avoid traffic personally.
Right. So, okay. So with that said, do you think activity schedules should always be used with fun activities first prior to using it for work or less preferred activities?
I never say always, and I never say never. I think I feel like this is like, I should wear a t-shirt that says it depends on your learner, but it really does. If your learner is really flexible, then you might not have to start with such a heavy pairing process. That might not be necessary. You know, and especially if the main issue is that the learner needs more structure and needs more predictability, then this schedule coming in with all of the events of the day might not be aversive at all. It might be like, even if there's an aversive event in there, it's like, well, thank God, at least I know it's going to happen. So as important as pairing is, whether it's pairing, you know, with a new therapist, or, you know, a new event or a new place or a new schedule, try it out, see how it goes with your learner. But I would say, yes, I'd like to err on the side of caution. And if you're going to introduce something new, introduce it in the context of preference.
Okay, got it. Very good. So why don't you give your third, there's one more question, but it's also time to give the third keyword.
Oh, the third keyword is happiness.
Oh, that's a fantastic keyword.
Thank you.
Okay, so and just one quick thing about the keywords is one, Marissa is not going to be repeating them. And of course, like I said in the chat, if you are getting CEUs or require a certificate of attendance, please send the keywords to me at ray@abaskills.com, and I will send you your certificate as well as a copy of Marissa's PowerPoint. Now, for the last question, what is, oh, I'm sorry, what's the youngest learner that you've used a schedule with, and what was the skill that you worked on with that learner?
The youngest learners that I've used the schedule with were preschool age, and the skill that we were working, so an activity schedule, that would be the preschool age, and it was for their day, so navigating through their school program. Using a visual schedule, the youngest learner, he was 5 or 6, and it was for brushing his teeth. He was using a visual schedule for brushing his teeth. We used a visual schedule, and we didn't use any physical prompting. He did not like, he was okay with physical prompts overall. He did not like physical prompts during toothbrushing. So we respected that, and we made a visual schedule for him. And we taught him to follow the visual schedule by showing him how we did. So we modeled it for him. We'd say, okay, I see the left side of my mouth, and I'm going to talk the left side of my mouth. Now you do it. And he would point to it, and he would do the left side of his mouth. And he did very well with it. We used pictures for that. He was much younger, so.
Okay, so that actually brought up a question for me about kids that don't like physical guidance. So in the example you just gave, that particular learner had good imitation skills. So not all of our learners have good imitation skills. And I know I've come across this quite a few times, that kids don't want to be physically guided.
Yeah.
And they don't have good imitation skills. So then has that happened to you? And if so, I mean, like, how did you wind up teaching?
Yeah, I've had that experience before, where whether or not their imitation skills were strong, their attending to a model for that length of time was a challenge. And we were able to teach some skills through gestures. Now, it's going to be particularly challenging for more complex skills. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it is something that I have slightly less experience with. But we would use gestures for where the learner was supposed to go next. And we would always attempt to provide a model or a picture of what the expectation was. And we were able to teach some basic skills that way.
That's great. Very good. Okay, Marissa, that was a fantastic presentation, chock full of information, and we really appreciate you taking the time to give that to all of our ABA skills people out there.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Good night.